Okay, hi everybody. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Roy. I actually just flew in from Portland this morning. So it's nice to see rain and hot weather at the same time. Yeah, so this talk, the title is nice and everything, and a bit about myself. Now I work for Kodem Security. We're an application security company. We are focused on runtime, doing SCA and SAST. But my talk today is gonna be focusing on my experience in NSO Group. So just to like gauge the room, like how many people are familiar with NSO Group? Okay, perfect. So I will share something new with a lot of people. So NSO Group is a cyber offensive company. It's most famous for Pegasus. So maybe Pegasus more people are familiar with. Pegasus is a spyware. Essentially, the goal of Pegasus was to be able to break into phones, mobile phones, iPhones, and Android devices. And what I'm going to share with you is some of the experience from the attacker's perspective, what we can learn about it as we are trying to secure and defend our application, and what we tried to take into Kodem when we started building the product and everything. So as I mentioned, Pegasus is a spyware. It broke phones, but it essentially did compete with top security teams. Okay, competed with enterprise security teams. So I think that the lessons and what we were trying to achieve and do was mainly to compete with those teams, those security teams. So that's how, from the other side or the other perspective of what you are trying to defend from. So just want to dive into the key learnings that we have. And please feel free to stop me during the talk, ask question. We can make it interactive, like feel absolutely free. Perfect. So maybe before we dive in, so how many people here are like security people, CISO, application security? Okay. Okay. Do we have developers or engineers on? Perfect. Okay, so we keep it cool. Perfect. So this is a general distribution of vulnerabilities. Okay, so the numbers are constantly changing because every day we have like 1,000 new vulnerabilities, but what pops out here is actually the distribution. And you can see here like pretty clearly that medium and low vulnerabilities, there are tons of them. There are really, really, really tons of them. Now, it's a snapshot, like I think 6 months ago that we took. It's like we checked it on NVD and GitHub Advisory, and that's the. So it's you can think of it as a day. We can do it again today, and the number will change a bit, but the distribution will be pretty much the same. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, sure. I okay. Yeah.
I understand that the time frame where you collected those number of vulnerabilities. Is that over 6 months, 12 months, or what?
So it's about 6 months. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. So when we started working and trying to look into vulnerabilities and analyzing the software, we understood that we are competing with other teams, other humans. Okay, and most organizations, they are focusing their efforts on the critical and highs, right? Most of it, the SLAs on the critical and the highs, and then we also like get the understanding that SLAs means more time for medium and low. So if I'm able to exploit a medium vulnerability and to actually make it work, it will stay there longer. Okay, so as we as an attacker try to productize vulnerabilities, we want them to be there as much time as possible. Okay, so those SLAs and this distribution make it easier to us to try to exploit mediums. Also, something interesting about the distribution, like severities are mostly based on CVSS, obviously. And CVSS is not necessarily a tailored score to your environment, okay? It lacks some context, some understanding about the specific use of the application and the specific use of the environment on the vulnerability itself. So we will actually see how those scoring and SLAs can come handy to an attacker. The second thing that it's interesting about like attacking a system that it's not a single vulnerability. Okay, we need to create like a chain of multiple vulnerabilities in order to actually exploit a system. So uh, just trying to make it like concrete. So we need to get to the application. We need to privilege escalation. We need to get the data back. Usually each vulnerability is just a single step towards the goal. And of course, there's log4j, there are Next.js vulnerabilities. Some of the vulnerabilities are really, really explosive, but most of them are not. And then we started to look at the tools, like what are the security tools that all the companies use? So most of them, they are noisy, right? When you connect a new security tool, you get thousands of vulnerabilities immediately. So you start with a backlog of like 20,000, 30,000 vulnerabilities. The second you connected them, it's hard to like be on top of everything. The second thing is we use a lot of tools. And every tool is like niching on something. So we have an application security tool, we have a CSPM, we have WAF, and everyone grades the vulnerability based on what they know and what they look at. So you have a lot of criticals, a lot of highs in every different aspect, and every tool wants you to handle its own or is part of the world. And the third thing, it's also kind of like complemented to a lot of tools. They're very narrow. They look on a specific application. They look on a specific type of software, and they cannot like give you the full context or the full view of your entire environment. So, any question around like? Cool. So, what can we do? And when we look at those things, it's pretty hard. So the first thing I think, and it's actually cool because I met someone from MITRE earlier today, but it's to start and have a common language and common understanding of what attackers actually tries to do. So the MITRE attack framework help us by setting those tactics and techniques and give us common language to understand actually what are the goals, what are the attackers trying to do. And when we start, like, this is an example from MITRE itself, but it's all sorts of different things that we try to achieve when we exploit a system. And having this common language, being able to think like an attacker, meaning that we are able to track things that attackers tries to do. And when we start like looking at vulnerabilities, so you start with a big pile, right? Some of them are critical, some of them are high. You start with a big pile. When you try to understand like what exactly can I use each vulnerability for, so what an attacker can use this vulnerability for, you can start building a chain. So this is an example of a chain, and we will. I want to highlight a few points here, but you can see again that we have multiple vulnerabilities in the chain. Some of them are critical, some of them are medium. This is color-coded. I don't know if you see that at the back. But what we can also see is that when we start talking about the chain, so I can tell you this chain is a credential exfiltration. I'm able to build a story around the chain, and I'm able to communicate it with other people in the organization. So being able to build a story around why this vulnerability is important, why this fixing is important. Also, when we look on chains, so eventually, we want the cheese. So So when we start with initial access somewhere, and then we start going forward. So some of the vulnerabilities will be in multiple chains, right? So maybe they're more important. Some of them has a fix, some of them doesn't. Okay, so if I'm able to break somewhere some of the vulnerabilities, I'm effectively breaking the chain. So it allows me to take a proactive approach, even though not all the vulnerabilities over here are fixable. Maybe some of the chains are fixable and are preventable. So it allows us to take like not necessarily better, but a new approach toward hard word, but prioritize. Tell me, tell me. Thank you. So it allows us to do the word and like being more effective and being more proactive with those kind of things. So I think that the main concept here is that we need to look at chains as a baseline to understand the actual risk for your environment. So two mediums can be critical when chained together, and bunch of critical if they are like on an island and they can do anything. They're not necessarily as urgent for your application at the moment. So it allows us to really think um, about effectively remediating and improving the posture score. So like technically, how can we start doing those things? And maybe like a word before, like what we were trying to do with Pegasus, and why the chains are such a powerful tool in our opinion. So as I was saying before, we are trying to create a story. The story is something very, very like effective and strong, and we used it in Pegasus to teach each other like uh, about the tools, about the chains, about everything. So this kind of view and being able to find like a medium vulnerability that is, you know, perfect for us, for our use case, it was a big win. We were also able to do what we call like expanding the vulnerability. So usually when we find a vulnerability, we could find adjacent vulnerabilities which are practically the same. It can be because it's the same people that wrote the code. It can be because it's the same components. So there are also sorts of things. And then those vulnerabilities will also be classified as medium probably, but they are not disclosed yet. So when they will be disclosed, I can assume I can prepare like ahead of time because I know those SLA ahead of time. So it really allows me as an attacker to exploit the way that the organization work and think, not only being able to exploit the application, but exploit the workflows of the organization. So what can we do and how can we start to think on our organization this way from the attacker lens? So the first thing is making an inventory. So it sounds simple in theory, but we have tons of stuff, right? We have containers, we have EMs, we have legacy software, we have cloud software, like third parties, whatever. So we need to understand what we have. The second thing that is important to understand is mitigations. Mitigations are usually like the attacker's worst nightmare. Like being able to mitigate with, for example, WAF rules or, you know, doesn't really matter. It's very powerful and it's very hard to go through. So understanding the mitigation will allow you to understand how your prioritization should be, or your own organization should be. And the last thing is really start to develop this like thinking of chains. Like it's not an individual vulnerability. It's what I want to do with those couple of vulnerability together. And I just want to shout out a few tools, open source tools that you can all like start using today. So there's TeamPipe. It's a TSPM SQL tool, so you can just query your cloud provider. It's pretty agnostic with SQL. You have SIFT, which is an amazing SBOM software, and SCA. It's a software composition analysis. Also great. OpenGrep is the fork of SemGrep. And of course, now with AI, I put it the hacking face. You can use any AI providers that your organization allows you, but open source and AI specifically can really help you like train models for this specific use case. Really fine tune the models to talk about vulnerabilities, chain, explain you what the vulnerabilities are, and connect between a vulnerability and a technique or tactic with the MITRE ATT&CK like automatically. And obviously like tons of vulnerability database out there. OSV have also a graph database, which can be very, very useful when thinking about chains. So quick summary before we go into the questions. The first thing I think it's most important is that as an attacker, you take what you got. You take what you have, right? You don't wait for the perfect thing. You take what you have in front of you, and you try to look on everything. You don't just look at every application individually. You do it obviously, but you look at the entire system, at the entire platform, and start to find these mini holes that you can go and weave your way through. Okay, so we take an holistic approach as an attackers, and it's really important to look at those application as a complex. The third thing is that most vulnerabilities need to be chained together in order to be effectively exploited and effectively exploited for a long period of time. When we have chains with small vulnerabilities, we can usually create backup for part of the chain, allowing us to be able to get to market as fast as possible. So again, when we talk about like companies like NSO, we have a product. We want to get with our product as fast as possible to the market. And it means that when Apple like sends a new iOS update, we want to be able to exploit this version the next day. So we are able to do it with a lot of vulnerabilities and with a lot of backups to those vulnerabilities. And the last one is again, I'm going to emphasize it, that the chain creates a story. Story is something that we are able, like most of the hands here was application security guys. So chain allows us to create a story, inside the organization, to be able to do a better handoff with ourselves and the developers and any other position in the organization that is interested in those things. So it's really powerful to talk about it and to like give some color to everything that we do and communicate. Yeah, you know, in Sun Tzu, it's always good to put him in attacking stuff, but really it's about it's know your enemy. It's the first part that everyone know, but the second part of the code is know yourself, and it's the essentially the biggest leverage that or advantage that you have over the attackers, that you have first-party access to all your infrastructure, code, and people. It's something that attackers that looks on the system from the outside obviously lack, and it's you can put it to work very effectively in your environment. So let's go questions. Yeah, no questions. Thank you.
Maybe. We have a question back here.
Great talk. Thank you. As a user, where do we get information on vulnerability chains? What I've seen is, I agree with what you're saying, but it's very hard to get info on this CVE or vulnerabilities chain to that one. So while it all makes sense, practically, what can we do to get the chaining data that we can mitigate it?
So chaining is obviously, it's hard. Like people work on it full time. I think that the practical thing to start with is understanding how to put labels on vulnerabilities. And once you have those labels, like what tactic or technique this vulnerability, if you go to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, they have the matrix and you can just mix and match. So when you start like understanding the labels and when you develop this language, you will start to see the patterns appear. So mostly I would say it's trying to, like AI is great in that, by the way, just giving you what this vulnerability can be used for and just go from there, like mix and match. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, the chain needs at least one vulnerability in it that's exploitable in the sense of CVSS. So there has to be at least one that actually compromises it. The rest of them have to do with basically expanding the damage that can be done, turning something small into a RCE. So at least the chain must have at least one CVSS greater than 0, impact of exploitability, or or one of those impacts. So if you're going to look at that, then you can look at how to use other vulnerabilities or information to expand the impact of the vulnerability that you found.
yeah. Right.
Hello. To expand on his question about authoritative data and mapping vulnerabilities to the MITRE attack framework. So from a defensive perspective, we're trying to go to the left of the MITRE attack framework to block them in the hopes they don't get to the right. But the challenge is, where do we find that authoritative data that says this privileged access vulnerability is part of that chain? There's only a few spots, but when you approach this, like, how did you put that chain together as you're thinking through it from an attacker's perspective? And how could you find a way to do that in an automated, manner, so that your average vulnerability team, which is severely understaffed, can go, those 2 3s are really a 9?
Yeah. So obviously, like in NSO Group, we had multiple tools to try to do it automatically. And we also had lots of tools to try to find new vulnerabilities that weren't disclosed. So the main thing, like for the second one, it's mainly fuzzing and going through code. For the first one is actually going over the CVEs themselves, with the source code, for the open source packages, obviously, description and everything, and try to, back then I think it was machine learning. It's before AI was cool, but yeah, it's a lot of manual work. So you have to tag data manually. You have to go through a lot of data manually. And I think now it's getting better. Like as you can parse a lot of that data and code automatically, pretty effectively. So it's getting better, and you can apply those tools like any ChatGPT can help you classify vulnerabilities. And if you fine tune those models, it can do it amazingly. And that's what we do in Kodem. Yeah.
As you've been going through this research, have you found a particular class of vulnerabilities that has been especially crucial to forming chains?
Especially what, sorry?
Especially crucial to forming these chains. Essentially, the idea that if you mitigate a class of vulnerabilities, you might mitigate more chains than others.
So I guess it depends on the system. I can tell you that I was part of the iOS team. I don't think I mentioned it. In the iOS team, we will build around specific tactics. So each team was like very tactic aware, and each team tried to develop the strongest solution possible. So I don't know if I can say it's a specific kind of vulnerability. I would say, like in general, when you try to exploit those kind of system, privilege escalation and being able to send data home, it's the 2 most challenging and interesting parts. So if you can resolve issues around this area, usually for phones and operating system, obviously memory corruption and stuff. That's the
Just real quick, you mentioned AI being great at some of this classifying. How have you explored agentic systems and how good they are at actually telling the story, building out those vulnerabilities, chaining?
So the story, it's very compelling, and it's always nice to get positive feedback, like great story, great question from AI. But yeah, storytelling, I think it's great to give him the description and everything, and it really builds what the attacker is gonna do and paints the awful picture that essentially is possible. So it's really good at those things, like taking the descriptions, processing it. You can try it with any description, and I think you will be happily surprised. Yeah.
Thank you.
So as a follow-up to that, have you found specific AI tools that are better at doing that than others?
So they're getting better every day. We personally fine-tune Llama and Llama 3 on our own vulnerability database, and we got very good results with this model. So yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Way in the back. Volunteered, I'm getting paid to run around.
Hi.
Hey.
I guess my question is, what's the difference or maybe the similarities between this and threat modeling?
And
The
threat
differences are
modeling?
maybe,
yeah,
for
so
threat modeling.
it's kind of a threat modeling. You have different models that you can apply to your organization and your team, and it's one of them. Yeah, I think it's a great tool, especially if you are familiar with other attack vectors and stuff. This is pretty digestible and with a lighter language than other threat models out there. So
Thanks.
okay,
Last one.
last one.
I have a answer for one of the questions. So types of attack was server-side request forgery combined with Nginx vulnerability, Nginx controller vulnerability on the same Kubernetes cluster. That was a chain that is possible to exploit, like network attack vector vulnerabilities and server-side attack request forgery.
Mhm.
So
Perfect. Yeah, I think
All right. Well, thank you, Roy. Great
sure.
job.
It was.
And
If you have more questions or you have any feedback or anything, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or to hear about Kodem. And yeah, thank you very much.
thank you.